Welcome back, Chappelle. All right. I don't know what is up with my camera, but it's like a little bit better. All right. So anyway, great class today so far. Really digging it. We started talking about classical Athens. We started talking about how the normal Athenian functioned in the classical Athens setting and how classical Athens still had dark underbelly sides to it when it came to the subjugation of women, when it came to slavery being very present in their society. But we did also begin to talk about the birth of philosophy in classical Athens, right? Particularly associated with the big three philosophers, right? We started off talking about Socrates, not Socrates, Bailey. Now, anyway, but the big thing is we did start talking about him. We talked about how he was one of the first people to begin to question society with questions that are not necessarily answerable, to extrapolate and actually maybe find further truth in the lives that we live in by trying to inspect things that not necessarily science can answer, right? For example, what's the meaning of life? What is the point? Does free will exist? What is perfection possible? What is evil, right? So really quick though, he also uses all of these theories and he comes up with this thing called the Socratic method, right? And the Socratic method is what we did in class today when we tried to extrapolate on what is evil, right? Then what truly is evil? Is evil like something that society decides on? Is it something our religion and our faith decides on? Like what is it truly, right? So we use that method to try and kind of expose our own ignorance and our own kind of hypocrisies when it comes to certain things, right? And that's his biggest attribute to philosophy in general is the Socratic method. And the fact that he actually used to begin to teach his theories in the Agora, right? And he was considered the smartest man of all time. But here's the ultimate irony, is he would tell you that he knows nothing, right? His most famous quote is, "All I know is that I know nothing," right? So he always used to say, I don't really know anything for sure, but I am fine with questioning everything to try and find a greater truth within these questions, right? So the big thing about it is he ends up living this super intense life, but does end up eventually being executed by the Athenian government, right? He is a transcendental piece of Western civilization history, even though he has a sketchy backstory. But his theories changed Western thought forever, right? And during a certain period, which we will talk about in this flip, known as the Peloponnesian War, he became known as what was many called the gadfly of Athens, right? And a gadfly is like an annoying pest that you just keep swatting at constantly to get away. Because after Athens lost the war, or this war that we will talk about today, just kind of keep it in the back of your mind, Peloponnesian War, we're bringing it up later. But after they lose this war, he begins to question a lot of things, and he begins to question the government, and he's saying this democracy stuff isn't working, and that this is more like rule by the mob, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then apparently he begins to kind of speak out against some of the Greek gods and goddesses, and he ends up being executed, and they execute him by what is up with Prezi not loading up good quality pictures these days. But they end up executing him using a poison, right? They force him to drink Execution of Socrates by Jacques-Louis David. So anyway, there we go. They end up executing him using a concoction known as poison hemlock, right? So hemlock is this root that grew on the banks of some of the rivers within Greece, right? And they boiled it down and made a poison out of it, and he actually was forced to drink that poison and kill himself under the authority of Athens, right? And you see all of his students right here standing around going, "No, don't let our leader die." But the big one is the guy sitting right here. And that's actually his most famous student, a guy by the name of Plato, right? And so Plato is going to be the guy that ends up following Socrates, right? Now, Socrates is a pretty hard act to follow, all right? So he's a pretty tough act to follow, but Plato does do a lot of very important things. For example, right, Plato took Socrates' theories that he never wrote down and actually recorded the thoughts and theories of Socrates in various different works, right? And he extrapolated on those thoughts and theories in his own personal works, like the Republic, right, which is his most famous work of literature that Plato ever actually recorded, right? He was born to a very wealthy family, but then discovered Socrates in the Agora and actually became one of his most prized students, right? And a peer of his as well. Now, he is the father of several different things, right? I need you to write down this one thing in particular, really quick. Plato's academy, right? The academy. He actually started the very first philosopher-based school. So philosophers could come and exchange and share their ideas and also teach to the public to earn a living wage. Because philosophers did not get paid very well. Socrates did not have much money. One of the guys that we'll talk about later on when we get to the Renaissance period, a guy by the name of Diogenes, he literally had no money, right? So philosophers were like these lovers of wisdom without getting paid very well by it at all, right? But he starts this academy so philosophers can actually exchange these ideas, grow these ideas, and teach to a yearning public that wants more intelligence, and then that way they can actually grow their wealth of knowledge, right? And he is actually considered now the father of rationalism, right? So there are two big isms that are going to grow out of the philosophic period of classical Athens, right? One of them being rationalism, and Plato is the father of rationalism. Rationalism is the belief that the human mind can use reason and logic to solve just about anything, right? Now, he uses these ideas to solve all kinds of different stuff. Now, they're recorded in his book known as The Republic. The Republic is literally his book. He also uses his rationalism to try and figure out what is the perfect leader. Is it democracy? Should we use a republic? What should it actually look like? And actually, he deduced that the philosopher king is the very best one. A very smart, benevolent, intelligent king is the best type of leader. But it's because he's using his mind to try and work this out. Because he's like, well, democracy could be ruled by a mob. A republic could be overthrown. But one noble king can guide us in the right direction. Because again, he's using his mind, his experiences to try and wrap his brain around it, right? Then he has this one, known as the allegory of the cave, which we will talk about tomorrow because it's a little bit of a lengthier explanation. But then he also tried that, here's a great example of him using rationalism, and it's known as his theory of forms, right? So the theory of forms by Plato is the idea of what happens to us when we die, where does everything come from, what is everything's origin, where do we all exist, etc., 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 right? I need to find a marker that works a little bit better. So this one will do just fine. All right, but anyway, according to Plato, there are two separate places that exist in this universe, right? And this is his theory of forms, right? So he believed, right, using rational logic to try and explain where all things come from, right? Where does everything actually originate from? I know I have a better I think this one works better. There we go, that's better. All right, so the theory of forms states that there are two kind of dimensions to existence, right? There is the ideal universe, right? The ideal universe, and then there is the real universe, right? And so these two things are split down the middle. And in the ideal universe, everything's form exists in the ideal universe, right? So ironically enough, he believed that the perfect human man existed in the ideal universe, maybe a perception of God or a deity of some type. The very perfect, I don't know, Satsuma exists in the ideal universe. The very perfect cat exists in the ideal universe, right? That is the worst cat. I'm sorry. All right, so the very ideal cat exists there, right? These are the perfect forms of everything that exists in our world, right? Now, here in the real universe, everything is based off of these ideal forms, but they're kind of messed up, right? So, for example, not every cat is this perfect form, and perfection is only possible in this ideal universe. However, it's never not necessarily possible, right? So here's another really, really cool one. Here's a way to explain it. So let's say the ideal universe is the cookie cutter, right? And you've got the perfect little gingerbread man, right? You got the perfect little, oh, look at him go, right? The perfect gingerbread man, right? The perfect, oh man, look at him go, oh, do you know the muffin man? The muffin man, the muffin man, the perfect gingerbread man, right? Now, any of y'all that have baked gingerbread cookies before, you know that when they come out the oven, they actually, one of them will be missing a head, right? And he just looks kind of like this. I can't draw to save my life. And then one of them's missing an arm, right? So the real universe is the actual product, whereas the cookie cutter is that perfect ideal, right? And he's kind of trying to use this to explain all things and their origin, right? Because he's, again, trying to use rationalism to wrap his noggin around it, right? So it's not going to be a perfect setup when it comes to philosophical thought, but Plato does have a lot of very, very important theories and actually exchanges, okay? Now, Aristotle is going to be the next guy, okay? Aristotle is yet another student of this Socratic themed idea in the philosophical school of classical Athens, right? Now, he's a later guy, though, right? He is a student and peer of Plato himself. And he believes in things like moderation, right? That everything needs to be in moderation. He teaches using these things called ethos, logos, and pathos. And we still use Aristotle's theories of ethos, logos, pathos to write effectively with rhetoric and to argue effectively and also to analyze a society, right? Ethos is your ethics or trustworthiness. Logos is you using your logic. And pathos is you using a sympathetic mind to connect to the audience, right? So Aristotle is actually using these mindsets to kind of further his ideas of rhetoric, writing, and how to transcribe intelligence to other people. So he's a huge writer. He's also, though, the father of empiricism, where rationalism is using your brain to try and figure everything out, being like, where are we all coming from, blah, 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 blah. Empiricism is actually based on learning from experience. Empiricism is more the basis of science, empirical learning, right? Looking at something, observing it, and then trying to understand it, right? Taking baking soda and vinegar and mixing them together and watching it bubble up. That's empiricism, and then judging everything based off that. Got it? That is the basis of modern-day observational science. And Aristotle's theories and ideas are going to be written down, and he came up with tons of them, right? He came up with the classification of animals in a simple taxonomic system. He came up with theories on how the planets move and how the stars are aligned. He was wrong, but we don't blame him. He didn't have a telescope. He was just like looking at stuff. He came up with theories on optics and how lenses work and also how light moves, right? So Aristotle is a mind-breaking genius of his own type, but he's the empirical genius, whereas Plato is the rational genius, and Socrates is like the godfather of the movements, right? So anyway, getting back to how do philosophers make money, the way Aristotle made money is because he was actually the tutor to Alexander the Great, right? Now, speaking of Alexander the Great is on his way, right? So, because here's the thing you got to understand is during this classical period of Athens, when philosophy is being born and, like art is being born and the Parthenon is rebuilt and Athens is growing and they're flowering and they're doing amazing things, intelligence-wise, but societally, not so much. The Peloponnesian War is going to be a result of this, right? So, you have to understand what ends up happening is this feud between Athens and Sparta was still growing, okay? Athens and Sparta were beginning to hate each other like they never had before. Athens was in its Delian League, was collecting dues, was building statues of Athena out of ivory and gold when that was not necessary, right? So, and doing all this other ridiculously big stuff and forcing other communities to have democratic systems. Sparta was not okay with this, right? So Sparta and Athens are going to end up going into a 27-year-long war that is going to decimate both of their city-states, right? Now, the big way that this actually ends up happening is it comes down to two leagues, right? We know the first league already, the Delian League. Athens and its allies has a huge navy, it's forcing people to pay dues, and is promoting democracies only. Well, in retaliation to this, because Sparta decides, you know what, we're going to try and take Athens down a peg or two, we're going to create our own league. And Sparta creates this thing known as the Peloponnesian League, right? And the Peloponnesian League was Sparta and its allies, and they had a massive land army, right? So no one could take out Sparta on the ground, and no one could take out Athens in the water, but this is going to explode into a very fiery and intense war. And it actually all came down to just trade relations, right? One of Sparta's allies that was in its new Peloponnesian League named Megara actually wanted to trade in a certain area, but Athens put up a big embargo and told them that they were not allowed to trade unless they were inside the Delian League, and Sparta was like, you cannot tell our ally to do that, and a boom, and a huge war ends up erupting, right? And also, after a long stalemate period, because 27 years of war, it's not like it was 27 constant years of war, because there was a huge stalemate there in the middle, and no one was really winning. Sparta was using its land army to set up big perimeters around Athenian city-states. The Delian League and Athens was using its navy to blockade all of Sparta and things like that. And so they end up kind of doing some dicey stuff. At one point, the Athenians end up attacking a city-state known as Syracuse. Does not go well. A lot of Athenians die. It's really bad. All right, so, and also Pericles, their fearless leader, dies in a plague, right? That's the big thing. After this long stalemate, Sparta wins after actually reaching out to Persia and borrowing their naval fleet, right? Which is the dirtiest and most messed up thing that has ever happened. And this conflict left southern Greece in rubble, right? So it was kind of like, boom, Athens, boom, Sparta. They end up fighting for 27 straight years. And even though Sparta did not get the plague that Athens received, and also that Sparta is going to ally with Persia and end up taking Athens out and forcing them to surrender in this war, now southern Greece has been decimated, right? The war itself has left Athens in rubble and Sparta in rubble, and their allies very, very weak. That left room for the rise of Alexander the Great, right? So now that Sparta and Athens had fought each other and they were in a very weak state, Alexander and his father begin to rise up to power and dominance, right? Now, just so you understand, though, Alexander the Great, a very, very commonly referred to man, is not from the southern area of Greece, right? He is from a region known as Macedonia, all right? So Macedonia is on your map quiz that we had the other day. It's right here. It's north of Greece, right? It's very, very mountainous, and at the time, it was considered that it was full of uncivilized mountain people and these frontier people, right? Well, since they were this big group of uncivilized woodsmen that lived up in the middle of the mountains, all they really needed was a leader to unite them, right? So here is Greece. Athens is located right here. Sparta is located here. Alexander and his father were from this area up here, right, in Macedonia, okay? So the big thing about it, though, is they have an infamous king that comes together and actually organizes them all together and brings them into a huge fighting force. And it's Alexander the Great's father. And he is an infamous king, infamous, famous, all the things above. He is the king of Macedonia. His name is Philip II, right? Philip II organizes all of the Macedonians into a humongous military, and he creates multiple divisions. He creates a cavalry, he creates phalanx systems, raid soldiers, he actually creates a very sophisticated military, and also begins to study ancient Greek military and figures out ways to flank the enemy, to get around them, to try and use better military tactics to defeat the people that he knows he's going to want to have to one day fight. And also, a lot of y'all are looking at him like, man, Philip is goofy looking. He ain't got the top of his head. And also, this eyeball is really messed up. Fun fact about his eyeball, he lost it, all right? Not like he woke up one morning and couldn't find it, but actually it got shot in the eye with an arrow, right? So he literally, apparently at one of the battles, I think it's at the storming of Thebes, somebody shot an arrow off and Philip looks up and goes, "Thack!" And it actually went straight into his eye, and they had to pull it out with the arrow itself. All right, but Philip did actually end up losing his eyeball to an arrow, right? And I'll tell you what he said he thought he saw later, all right? But apparently the Oracle of Delphi said, you've seen something you're not supposed to. We'll talk about that story tomorrow, all right? So now Philip is going to seek change, right? He wants to take Macedonia and turn it into the dominant force in all of Greece, right? And the big thing is he uses the Peloponnesian War to his advantage. Now that Sparta and Athens have had this huge war where they attacked each other, now Sparta's like, wait a minute, holy shenanigans. Not Sparta, Macedonia's like, wait a minute, holy shenanigans. They're both super weak right now. So he goes out and he attacks them after the Peloponnesian War is over, right? And Philip is going to conquer a massive territory, many small city-states following this Peloponnesian War, and he ends up forcing the people he takes over into his army, and he creates a huge military. And he was an absolute professional at using this thing, the phalanx system, which again is symbolized right here. The rows and rows and rows of soldiers with the spears out front and their shields up front. All these hoplites are borderline impenetrable in Philip's phalanx system, right? Now, an important thing though, if you don't know what a phalanx is, go ahead and highlight this and then jump back and then find it because you're going to need to reference it because it does come up on the test pretty good number of times, right? So Philip II, though, does conquer this huge territory, and he begins to threaten Athens, right? So he ends up using a lot of different ideas. He uses diplomacy, which is actually going to another place and being like, hey, you join our military, you join our empire, and we will give you the benefits. You can fight in our army, you won't have to pay steep taxes, and you can be a part of our winning system, right? That's diplomacy. He then also threatened Sparta, and he was like, look, if you don't become a part of our empire and military, then we're going to come take you over. And Sparta, being the militaristic empire that they were, also at least knew that there was no way they were going to win a war against this guy following the Peloponnesian one. So they gave in. And he also used bribes to take over other large city-state and create allies. But his main target that he wanted to take out was Athens and their big ally right here, Thebes. That's not where Athens is. Athens is right there, right? So Athens and Thebes were his main target, right? So the big thing about it is Philip is going to do a lot of different stuff. Since he knows he's going after Athens, he hires Aristotle to be his son's tutor. Here is Alexander the Great himself, known at the time as Alexander III, right? And also, when he's 18, Alexander begins to help his father defeat the leftover Delian League. They defeat Thebes together, and Athens ends up surrendering out of absolute fear, right? So we are going to stop there, and then we are going to talk about the rest of the stuff in class, and I will see you guys later. Y'all have a good one, all right? Bye.